Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can. And John, if you're there, I sent you the option to promote you to a panelist, which means you'll be able to talk at will. You just got to hit it. Okay, there you are. And it's 10 right now, but we're missing a few people, so we'll give it just another few minutes here, I suppose. Quick. There we go. Morning, Tony.
Good morning. Sorry I can't be there today. We had some staffing issues.
That is all right. Okay, so it looks like we're still missing Yona, Zach, and Isaac. We'll wait another minute or two and see if we can get anybody else.
Eric.
But we do have a quorum. All right, there's Zach. And Isaac. Okay, we now have everybody but Yona. You're probably go whenever you're ready.
Let's just maybe give him one more minute.
We have Shane twice.
Yona's coming.
Great. Shane, are you on with us on two different devices? Maybe none devices.
Let's give it a little bit longer here. We're waiting on one. I could be on until 10:07. It just changed.
It's 10:07.
Yep,
The deadline has been reached.
it has been reached. I am chatting with him right now on Teams, and he is gonna join soon, so we'll just let him pile on when he gets on. Okay, so we'll start up. First off, thanks everyone for making today happen right before a 3-day weekend. I think that's pretty great that we all had an opportunity to do this. And also thank you for those folks who were flexible with your schedule and were able to move things around to make today happen as well. So today on the docket, we're gonna one last time review the draft terms and definitions. So this was a document that was sent to the council yesterday morning. So if you could pull that up on your computer or bring it up however you want to view it, we'll also put it up on the screen. So we'll go over these. All the edits in here came from our discussion at the last meeting, and then there's also some additional comments from the legal team that reviewed this after the fact as well. And then once we conclude this, I don't think it should take very long, we'll move into manufacturing guidelines and go from there. All right, so.
Sorry, I was not prepared. I'll get that up
Oh, sorry.
on the screen.
Okay, that'll give Yona time to come on.
He's on.
He's on. Great. Hi, Yona.
Yes, I'm here. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Oh, where did they go?
You want me to send it to you?
No, I got it right here.
Okay.
I just got to Teams it at myself. Make sure I have the right version.
Should be 041524 at the end. All right, can everybody see this on their screen?
No, they cannot yet.
Oh, sorry.
I am going to just download it. Open it in a clean window. There we go.
Okay. So now that we're all on the same page and we're looking at the same document, I'm just going to walk everybody through the changes that were made, and feel free to have any discussion as we're moving along. Admittedly, the biggest change since the last time the council has seen this occurred to this first definition of synthetic cannabinoid. As this was getting reviewed, it was determined that the highlighted section there that is struck through was really us trying to define chemical synthesis within the term synthetic cannabinoid. But we're already defining chemical synthesis. And so basically what happened here was that this language that was struck through was simply moved down into the third definition of chemical synthesis. And so if there's any concerns or questions on that, we can discuss. And then the other little bit of underlined language there at the top was a suggestion by legal to reference this recommended rule definition back to the statutory definition. So if there's any comments there, please feel free to speak up.
Is it, so the MCA is a new addition, the reference to that specific section, because it's replacing it, right?
It's not replacing it. So
No, I meant replacing the stuff that was struck out. It's like just
Yes.
now referring to it.
Yep, so anything that's underlined is new, and then anything that's stricken will be, in this case, just moved down to that third definition.
Since that's gonna be part of it, could you read off really quick what 1612-102 says, or
Yes.
unless it's long, I don't,
Nope, it's not that long.
I just certainly don't know it.
I'll read it word for word
Makes
here.
perfect sense.
Okay, so this is the definition found in 1612-102. It is synthetic cannabinoid. It has the meaning provided in 5032-22 and includes any cannabinoids produced artificially, whether from chemical synthesis or biosynthesis using recombinant biological agents, including but not limited to yeast and algae. So that's the definition that's in House Bill 948.
Yep. Okay,
And then that also references the Controlled Substances Act. Okay, and so then you'll see then on sub AI, struck through or naturally occurring cannabinoids. If you'll remember, when we were first drafting these, we had this term natural cannabinoids or naturally occurring cannabinoids. And so we decided to strike that out. And once we get to the natural cannabinoids below, you'll kind of see what we adopted instead. All right, then scrolling down to C sub II. It was recommended by legal to remove this. It was feeling a little, for lack of a better word, squishy. Since these are rules and regulations that have enforcement actions potentially tied to them, including cannabinoids whose intoxicating effects are yet to be determined, seemed hard to enforce. And as these cannabinoids become more and more studied, they can begin to fit under CI, intoxicating or non-intoxicating. So that was a deletion that was recommended there from the legal department. Any thoughts there? Okay. All right, well then we'll move on to 2. which was, there's been no changes to this. We've been in agreement on this definition for a while now, basically just amending the terms to better identify these products. Okay, and then we'll scroll down to 3. Perfect. Okay. 3, so chemical synthesis. This is kind of the other term that had some substantial changes made to it since last meeting. Like discussed, that whole underlined section, sort of mid-paragraph, is what was copied from the initial synthetic cannabinoid definition and moved down here. And I actually, personally, I think this is a good move. I think it is a good definition for chemical synthesis now. The other amendment here was our first stab at this was really kind of defining the chemical substances and not the process. So as you'll see, there was a little bit of sentence restructure there to make sure that we're talking about a process and not a substance. So if there's any concerns with that, feel free to speak up. You can also, you know, if you didn't have time to review these, feel free to make edits in the document and pass them along as well. All right. We'll move on to the 4th definition here. You could scroll down a little bit. Perfect, thank you. All right, natural cannabinoids. Not much edits here. Probably the biggest one is that the, in quotes, naturally occurring cannabinoids was replaced with phytocannabinoids. That was a term that we discussed last meeting. Legal agrees that this is a good inclusion because, you know, phytocannabinoids is a term that you'll regularly see in the scientific literature, and so including it here kind of gives a nod to that, so that readers, when they're reading, you know, anything within MARTA or within scientific literature, and they see natural cannabinoids or phytocannabinoids, we know we're all talking about the same thing. The other edit of note here is in the comments on the side. So in our initial draft, we used the phrase chemical or mechanical extraction process. It was recommended to change this to chemical or mechanical manufacturing. The reason being, chemical and mechanical manufacturing are defined in the marijuana rules. And so that provides some good flow there. I do not think it changes the meaning. And then as you can see, a little bit of language was added to reference the reader to ARM 4239-102, which is where those 2 terms are defined. All right, I'll leave a little bit of time for comments there if anyone has any. And then as you can see down in C sub II, again, the same recommendation to remove the sort of quote unquote squishy language there. Okay, we're moving right along. Now we're on to the last 2 terms, 5 and 6. So the underlined portion there on 5, that was a suggestion from the council from last meeting, basically making it exceedingly clear that a natural cannabinoid product contains natural cannabinoids, does not contain synthetic cannabinoids. The minute a synthetic product is added to anything, it elevates to a synthetic cannabinoid product. All right, and then term 6 there, decarboxylation, no edits to this except for striking through in the cannabinoid industry. The thought there being that, you know, these are going to be recommended terms that will most likely be inserted under the Cannabis Control Division, and in that context, this is what we're talking about, is cannabinoids, cannabis. And then last term there, manufacturing, it was recommended to strike through this. It was determined to be outside of the scope of the council. And additionally, there are a few manufacturing type definitions that exist already within the program. And so we were finding a little bit of conflicting language there. However, this is an interesting and a good reference in the future. If anything needs to come up, it could be a resource for the department to look at in the future. All right, so I'm just going to give you guys about a minute here to look at this, and if you have any comments or anything comes up, this will be your time to voice that. Okay, hearing none, we'll move forward. So what I'll do with this is basically just accept all the changes, clean up the document, and I will send it out one last time to the council as a cleaned up document. And barring any objections or major edits, this will get inserted into the final report. Okay, so the next item on our docket here is to move on and talk about our potential manufacturing guidelines. So.
Did you want me to pull up either of those documents?
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you. We'll give you a minute to do that. Hopefully everyone here had a chance to review the two documents prior to the meeting. If not, we're going to bring them up as well. And I think the general plan here is just to have an open discussion again and see what people's thoughts are.
Let's start with the FDA route.
Sure. Yeah. Okay, so up on the screen is the FDA version of what we were discussing. And so this was just a high level one pager to sort of set the scene for this route. Does anyone have any concerns or comments? Is there any discussion, questions? This is a great opportunity to voice any of your concerns, or if you're in agreement, just let us know.
I'll add really quickly that these were just finished in the last couple of days and have not yet been added to the website. I see that we have a few members of the public watching in right now, so feel free to look at this on your screen. Also, it will be added to the Advisory Council resources page.
Quick comment. I think one is I don't think there's anything new in here that you haven't already expressed, so it's not a surprise, if you will.
Yeah.
So
which is
I
good.
think, yeah, no,
Yeah.
I think I've made comments based on this position in the past. I don't know that it's really necessary to repeat them.
Okay.
But I think it's an accurate and fair capture of what most of the council has been advocating. So.
Okay, great. All right, I'm gonna let the awkward silence go for a little bit longer. Any folks online would like to comment?
Looks like John has his hand raised. John, you should be able to just unmute yourself.
Great, thanks. I just wanted to raise my hand. Yeah, I think that document is good, and I agree. It reflects, I think, what we've spoken around or spoken directly to. I'm just seeing kind of the mention of dietary supplements, and I think, you know, I don't know how to put this in, but I'm going to be thinking about, its intended use. So, dietary supplements, where would a synthetic cannabinoid fit into like the FDA scheme? Would it be a dietary supplement? Would it be a drug? Would it be something else like alcohol? So they're just, something to think about. And I don't have any further explanation of how to embed that in here, but I think this is a good document.
I can try to help a little bit with that question if you want. I think dietary supplement is probably the most logical landing spot for FDA. They specifically list in their regulations that are specific to dietary supplements that it's intentionally that set of regulations is specifically meant for what they call botanicals and I can't remember the other term, herbs, I believe, just as a general, but botanical products are generally meant to go through that dietary supplement. So I think that's probably why a lot of people point to that quickly, as opposed to the pharmaceutical prescription market.
But
Not trying to say that synthetic cannabinoids are a botanical, but it comes from the plant that would go through that mechanism.
yeah, but to comment on that, this document specifically only talks about synthetic cannabinoids, not necessarily or natural cannabinoids, correct?
Correct, but our definitions currently categorize naturally occurring, or what we're now calling natural cannabinoids, as synthetic if they are treated chemically, even if they occur in the plant. So natural cannabinoids that are in the plant would become synthetic just by the action of chemical, which would then make that conflict.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why it would still be a botanical. And just to be clear, that FDA, under the dietary, even though they have this as botanicals and they promote that, they're of the position that none of this should go through. And that includes even the non-psychoactive ones. For example, I read a bunch of letters that they're adamant that CBD should not be considered a dietary supplement, and they're issuing letters for companies that are doing that.
Yeah, so the FDA is issuing warning letters to CBD producers who have health benefit statements about the product. Everyone else are kind of hands off with. Does anyone else have any comments on this potential route for guidelines? Okay. So is anyone else raising their hand? I can't see.
No.
Okay, great. So I guess then we will move on and we can discuss the other route, which was what Eric was proposing. His write-up was sent out this morning, and we'll give him a chance to talk about what he put on paper.
First off, I want to make it clear, I put discussion points at the top for a purpose. This is not my starting point. I actually have 7 or 10 pages of what I was originally working on. This just kind of cropped up towards the end that kind of became a stopper. I do not intend any of this to be included in the report, whether it's the main report or part of my dissent. This doesn't have anything to do directly with what the council's been tasked to do. The wrench it threw in was that I was working on a dosing table where you would list the cannabinoids that the lawmakers might want to include, what an allowable dose would be, and what the relative psychoactivity is so that we can adjust the dose. In other words, you don't want to allow a 10 milligram dose of Delta 9 and a 10 milligram dose of something that's 50 times stronger. You have to adjust it down by that factor. So I was doing that in Excel, doing it in Word so that we could have those to talk about. And then this cropped up through a really weird panel through the Helena School District presentation, which kind of threw me off. And so I was making every effort that I could on the manufacturing side to use the current marijuana market as the starting point. In other words, why reinvent the wheel if we can just start there, adopt all of that, and then modify or mostly add components if we're going to move into what's now termed a synthetic. The problem became when I was doing all of those dose calculations, my understanding apparently of the dosing requirements that are allowed under what I just call MARTA, it's the entire mechanism, is it's not what I understood and certainly doesn't seem to be. So I'd like to have a discussion so that I can maybe learn how you can have a single serve that has more than 10 milligrams of THC in it. And I was running into them everywhere. I went to half a dozen, I think, dispensaries in Helena in about 2 hours and just kept running into products all the time that were single pieces of candy, for example, that would have 50, 80, or 100, sometimes over 100 milligrams. So I thought that wasn't allowed. And if I try to make the the synthetic side copy this, then that would allow a lot higher doses than I thought would ever be intended. Yeah. So am I misunderstanding it, or are these products just not in compliance with MARTA and they haven't been caught yet, or?
So the rules and regulations state that within the recreational program, you're correct, you can't have more than 10 milligrams of THC per serving and 100 per package.
Yeah.
There is a 10% manufacturing variance on that, so it can vary a little bit, but not a lot.
Like 103 is okay.
Yep,
right.
exactly.
Yep.
Yeah.
There were a lot of products like that.
Yes. So ours is 10%. So for a 100 milligram package, that's 90, 20, and 10. Yep. And then we also have a medicinal market that can sell over that.
These were specifically not medicinal, I asked.
Okay.
Because I knew that there were higher limits allowed for medical patients.
Gotcha. So. Okay. And so, if you were finding products that were non-compliant, like what was listed in your bullet points here, then without seeing the label, they could have very well been non-compliant.
Just to be sure, I brought the label, so
okay.
We could discuss it if we brought the actual products to make sure that I wasn't.
Yep, and sometimes I have seen products occasionally where they'll have, over 10 milligrams in what you would assume would be a serving, but maybe somewhere on the label it says a quarter of this is a serving.
Right.
So sometimes that gets
like
a little weird.
Chocolate bar.
Yeah, and sometimes even with the scored chocolate bars, they'll be sometimes incorrectly scored. And some of this is just growing pains. Our market's not very mature, and so we still are, going out there, finding non-compliant product, bringing people into compliance. And so, our inspectors do a really good job of that. And I'd be curious to see where these came from. I don't want those names to be spoken here. But
I know.
If you feel so compelled, there is a complaint where you can do that.
I was referred to that.
Okay, great.
I haven't decided whether I'm going to do that or not.
Okay.
First, more importantly, I just wanted to understand whether this is truly okay or not, because that would completely change what I was working on the manufacturing side.
Yeah, what you could have seen, it could very well could be true. But what the rules and regulations say, you are correct. It should be at 10 milligrams per serving, 100 milligrams per package.
So I guess my cynic in me says if the natural marijuana isn't routinely meeting the limits, then how could I expect to work on another product that is even more difficult?
Yeah.
Because the numbers need to be lower
Yeah.
on the synthetic side. There's a couple that could be slightly higher, but almost all of them need to be much lower.
Yep.
And if, like some of the products I have in here that are very clear that if you took it according to instructions, you would get 8 to 10 times the dose you think you're getting at 10.
Yeah.
And if you did that with the synthetic side, you're also going to be getting 8 to 10 times as much.
Right, just because it's more potent.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and even if you lower it down by a factor of 30, if it's 30 times stronger, you're still going to be getting 8 more than what you should have got.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's what stopped me on that part, which is why I didn't present that part of us to discuss today, because my guess is I'm going to have to rework it all. So, you
Yeah.
want to see the products, or is that something for some other time, or?
I think that would be, outside of the scope of the synthetic council,
Okay.
because those are, marijuana products and not
Right.
synthetic.
So I guess my question then becomes, if currently, whether it's because we're a new industry or young industry, like you said, if I can walk in and my daughter can walk in and find products in 40 seconds, where approximately half of the products are above. It's not like just one or two. I mean, it was like gummies and lemonade were about the only two edible products that actually met the limits. Almost everything else exceeded them. So it was not just like, oh, look at this, I found one in the back of a bin. It was like more than 50% of the products in every dispensary we went into that had edibles had these violations. I just didn't want to buy them all. I just bought one of each example.
Yeah.
So my concern is if we really are that young, then one, it seems like we really need to get on top of that. And two is that's not the time to entertain anything, any expansion, if you will. Because I don't understand the motivation of the lawmakers, but it seems like they want to at least explore the possibility of synthetically making some cannabinoids, which could be ones that are just in marijuana naturally and not allowing any novel ones in. But
Yeah.
It sounds like that's not really doable if half the products don't meet now. Why put more out there?
Yeah, I definitely understand your concern, but I also have just some other comments, and that being, this is a very small sample size.
Right.
There are hundreds of dispensaries in the state, and 6 were evaluated here, and
You only have 8 dispensaries in Helena? I looked at the dispensary list. It's not many. Might be 10 or 12. So to me, 6 out of 10 or 12 is still a pretty high number.
Yeah, well, I think extrapolating, just because half of the products that you found in these 6 dispensaries were compliant, doesn't mean that half of all of the products in the whole state are not compliant.
Agreed. I completely agree.
And so I still think there may be a path forward, but just not getting so granular, right? So there are these high level things that need to be addressed, which would be dosing, testing, purity, GMP standards. GMP is something that is not adopted in Montana right now, and I think for synthetic cannabinoids to ever really be a thing, that's probably pretty paramount to have that. So just some other things to consider there for folks on the council. But like I said, we do have a pretty new market comparatively, and everybody's still sort of learning how to run in this industry. And so, like you said, maybe it is too early to put forth any guidelines. Does anyone else have any concerns or comments or ideas on this?
I would just say that, you know, for us to just recommend guidelines of, you know, if you know, the legislature were to follow this path, you know, just to make the guidelines follow CGMP guidelines, CFR 111, or 211, you know, FDA stuff. Because, you know, Eric points out, like, if you've got, you know, just the inconsistency with the dosing, and you really have to pay attention to the labels if you're paying attention to the dose. You know, in CGMP environments, this is all handled, you know, products are manufactured to specifications. You know, granted, these are too, but like, you know, your specification for your, you know, your serving size is going to be, you know, pretty tight.
And I'll
But
throw out
the
there too, real
recommendation
quick.
would be follow FDA. Sorry.
Sorry, I just had a semi-related comment. I just did a quick Helena dispensary count. There's 22 at the moment. Thank you. All of which happen to be adult use and medical. So no medical only in Helena at the moment. So, pardon the interruption.
No, thanks, Andrew.
No, that's good.
So does anyone have any ideas on, you know, paths moving forward for discussing potential guidelines for manufacturing for the report?
Because from my perspective, it sounds like we're in the exact same spot we were last time, which is I'm probably the only one advocating for providing the lawmakers with one that's not the FDA route, if you will, which is what everybody's advocating. I mean, is that still sounds the same, doesn't it? My position, just to reiterate it really quick, my position is like on the FDA route. It's everything in here is true. I just think it's not. It's a complete misapplication in the sense that synthetically creating a cannabinoid and naturally growing a cannabinoid have essentially the same toxicity and can be both need to be regulated. Saying that the current system, which includes the products we're seeing now through the medical marijuana program, do not need to go through CGMP and can therefore be loose and not meeting the requirements. Seems weird to then say, well, everything else needs to go through CGMP and create a higher hurdle just because it's going through a different market. Perhaps everything should be going through CGMP if the concern is we're not creating products that actually meet the regs. I'm not advocating that. I'm just saying it seems like we are clearly having a double standard between where the cannabinoid comes from. So,
You know, I think there's clearly a line drawn in the sand, Eric, and I think that, you know, plant-derived cannabinoids have been around for thousands of years. There's a long history of consumption, like it or not. So you're drawing the line in the sand at once you go down a synthetic pathway, you know, you're making a whole chemistry soup of who knows what. And, you know, the logical place for that to go would be, you know, an FDA regulated entity, because, you know, otherwise, you know, the state, you know, we kind of discussed this earlier, you'd kind of be on the hook for saying, you know, what synthetic process are we going to recommend, right? We're going to actually recommend a specific synthetic process. I don't know if I could sign up for that.
That's not how the FDA operates anyway, so we wouldn't need to. They don't specify a specific process either. The manufacturer has to propose it. So.
Agreed.
And
agreed. Absolutely. It's yeah. Go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah. On your kind of your first point, I think it's because you don't quite understand my position because I haven't gotten that into that level of detail. You were saying that going the synthetic route creates novel cannabinoids that are not in the natural product that's been around for a long time. I agree with you. I have not proposed, in what I've been developing that was going to be presented, I have not proposed the allowance of any, what we are calling synthetic cannabinoids to be created for just that reason. I was restricting everything to the synthetic process for naturally occurring cannabinoids, not for the creation of new synthetics, if you will. That was the very first item on my 10 bullet list that I was originally going to present until this issue came up. So I'm in agreement with you that I think allowing anybody, even under a safe manufacturing method, to come up with a new cannabinoid that has not been consumed by anybody before and that we don't know anything about is unsafe and is not warranted. So on that part, I think we're in agreement. I'm restricting everything to naturally occurring cannabinoids. It's actually for the list I was going to present, it's item number 1 of the 10 items. Only naturally occurring cannabinoids can be sold. All others remain banned. Period. And that's consistent with our definitions that I think we're about to adopt. So anyway, I just wanted to clarify that it's not a point of argument. It's just I think you were expressing concern about a position that I wasn't taking, and I would have the same concerns you do.
Yeah, good. I that was not clear to me, obviously. So
well, I hadn't presented it yet, so it shouldn't have been. I completely understand that. Yeah, if I haven't shown it to you, you can't know.
yeah, and to be fair, my point is more like if we're going to go down that path, what I've seen other states do is effectively just, say, hey, we're going to do this, but all the rules we're going to make are basically going to reference FDA rules. That's all I've seen so far. Yeah,
and I don't think that's a bad approach. I mean, GMP sets out some really good guidelines. There's a lot of other good guidelines on how to do it that the state could easily not have to create from scratch. And a point that I should add, again, you wouldn't know this because I hadn't talked about it yet. There's been a lot of concern expressed by a lot of people, myself included, that there are some exotics that could make it in, and there are some, even if we write rules that the lawmakers decide they want to accept a couple of certain synthetics, someone could just come right around and make a new one that we hadn't anticipated. So the basic approach that I think most places take is kind of like a white list, black list, if you will. You can do something like 948 does, which is just ban everything you can think of, and then you'll have to redo it 28 times over the next 28 years as they come up with more stuff. Or you can come up with a white list, which is my preference, which is say, if you jump through all these hurdles, these are the few things that we will accept through, and then you don't have to deal with changing attempts to get through. That might be a tiny list, it might be no list, it might be more extensive than any of us want. But it's kind of like email. You could just block all email except for the ones that you think are okay, and you just deal with that. I think that's the easier regulatory approach. Is if the state decides we think these 3 naturally occurring cannabinoids could be made synthetically if they meet these 19 conditions in our table, then we don't have to revisit it all the time. And we would always have the option of removing it from the market for whatever reason if we chose to, just like the FDA does. They can remove products and do remove products that are not FDA approved. So there's always the option of that as well. So that was the approach I was taking, was only listing the things that we think could get through and eliminating all the other stuff.
With that Eric, with that recommendation, I think you'd have to. I mean, just thinking about it at the moment, I wouldn't be against that type of approach. I think it's been used elsewhere. It's just kind of a slippery slope in terms of like there's just a lot of pieces you'd have to kind of cover. So but it's not unreasonable. And for sure, these synthetic cannabinoids are made, safely, and I think isn't dronabinol, isn't that a synthetic cannabinoid? It's had some
Right.
FDA approval. I think Tony would know that. So obviously there are safe ways to do it, but
Right.
yeah,
And
it's a
there,
question of like, how deep do we want to go on the council?
right. And there
And again,
are companies that have a lot of really good experience making this stuff. I mean, most of the supplements out there are synthetic. I mean, B12, vitamin D. I mean, it's caffeine. Those, we think of those as natural substances, but the majority of the supplements that are in all of our stores are synthetics. So there are companies
yeah,
that can
no,
make this
totally,
really,
100%.
but it is a high hurdle. There's no doubt.
I think my concern comes from the fact that we're kind of opening Pandora's box here, and this is so new. Just the space of synthetic cannabis, cannabinoids, is so new that we're opening Pandora's box. I just foresee a massive game of synthetic cannabinoid whack-a-mole being opened, and does Montana have the resources to deal with this? The FTE, the money, the ability to really do this? And I keep getting drawn back to the FDA because this is a process that already exists. Why would we create something else, especially when this market is so new, especially when our natural cannabinoid market in Montana is also so new?
I don't disagree with you. I'm not advocating for this. The lawmakers were. I guess I'd like to make that point. I'm not saying that Montana needs to have synthetically made natural cannabinoids available through age-gated or not age-gated.
Well, so if you
The lawmakers
also
are the ones.
don't agree
Big-
with this guideline, then I think the council's in agreement then.
No, I do agree with the guideline because they ask us to develop it. I'm saying I'm not the king of Montana. I don't get to decide what products the lawmakers get to consider. They ask us, how would you do a synthetic cannabinoid process? And I can provide that, and we can provide that. It's just, they have to decide whether that's really something they want for the state of Montana. I don't get to decide that, I guess. This is no different than the work I do for pharmaceutical companies. I don't get to walk in and say, I don't think you should be trying to develop that drug or that way of making fentanyl. I just help them do what they need to do according to the rules, if that's what our lawmakers want.
So if we still put forth two sort of guidelines, right? The FDA route and then this route that you're interested in. I think like sitting down and doing dose tables was a good exercise, but I don't think that is appropriate for this report. I think a higher level sort of laying the land is what would be more appropriate, where you take a high level dive or look into dosing. Like you'd have to consider dosing, and these would be the things to consider for dosing, and not providing this is what your Delta 8 dose would be, this was what your Delta 10 dose would have to be. Look into purity testing. Why would purity testing be important?
That's all in this. It's in the 10 pages there. Purity, byproduct, residual chemical, all of that is in there. How you set a dose, the whole bit. It's all already in there. That is the top level. I've just worked down into the details, which is where the dose table came from. All of that other stuff is already set. I just haven't submitted it all because it's the first meeting we've had since we agreed I could even work on it, really.
So the folks that haven't been speaking up, do you guys have any, let us know what you think.
This is the I'm also the inspector and not the science background, but I've certainly been listening for the last handful of months. While the FDA seems like the cleanest route, I think there's I lend some some thought to Eric's process, and it just seems to me that's not a decision for us to make, it's for lawmakers to make, and I would think that we could, again, put both proposals in and let them make some decisions based upon it. Again, as I sit here and listen to the conversation, the FDA route does seem cleanest and easiest, if you will, and maybe the best. I simply don't know. I don't have enough science background to tell you, but from listening to it, it seems like this be not a real problem with submitting both and letting some decisions go from there. That's just my two.
We remain in the it should remain controlled
Okay.
corner.
And this is Tony, just for the public's knowledge, I am a pharmacist, and everything that we do and have to dispense does have to go through the FDA process. And while I don't totally agree with a lot of the decisions the FDA is making, and I understand and appreciate where Eric's coming from, I worry the Pandora's box, yes, and the fact that it's too new. I do think that Eric does have a good point, but from where we come from and from what I do as a living, I don't have that choice. And with the DEA and FDA potentially now rescheduling marijuana in and of itself, I think that compounds the issue that we're trying to deal with here. I don't think it's an if, I think it's a when. So I think should that happen, I think everything that we're doing on this, I understand the synthetic component of it, but that also really muddies the water from what our goal originally was and what we were thinking about when we started this committee. That's short way or a long way of me saying I think at this point we have to go the FDA route, but with the asterisk that Eric does bring up a good point. That's something that could be developed potentially in a future session.
And just, there is a little bit of the FDA route makes sense. I guess I would point that when you get down to the nuts and bolts, there are really two FDA routes. One would be the DSHEA, basically the dietary supplement route, which is what this probably would go under, as opposed to the pharmaceutical new drug app. The new drug app is easy. Not easy, it's a hard process, but you know that the product coming out of it is perfect. It's been given at least rudimentary safety testing. It's not complete, which is why you have to remove some drugs after 1 million people take them. But you know it's safe enough to start, and you know it's made well enough. The dietary supplement side is another route that people talk about when you say FDA. I think you guys kind of mentioned it a little bit in here, but I could be wrong. One caveat there is the FDA probably won't entertain it because they don't want to get involved at all, even for the non-psychoactives. So it's okay to say that we're going to maybe propose the dietary FDA route, but it's a dead end because they've already said they're not going to do it. And then second off, I think something that maybe people don't understand is that dietary supplement route is not all that controlled either, depending on your level of comfort. For example, I have no interest in this, but I could create a dietary supplement right now, put it on the market, start selling it all over the country for 30 days, and only then do I have to file for them to review it. And then they can maybe take 2, 3, 6 months if I can delay it before they finally tell me to no, take it back. So you can still get things on the market by telling people to go through the FDA route. So that's a concern. The second concern is the FDA themselves says that the dietary supplement route kicks in when you do interstate sales. So if a company within Montana were to decide to create the drug in Montana and not sell it outside Montana, they would probably have a pretty decent argument that they are in compliance with DSHEA and the dietary supplement because they're not doing interstate commerce. So even the FDA route has problems. It's not a panacea. Now the drug route doesn't. The drug route is clear as a bell. That's national standard. Everybody accepts it. But there are ways to do an FDA route that probably don't do what all of us think it should do in this realm.
Well, I would, this is Isaac. What you just said I think that's always in my mind as a concern is, lean on federal regulations as much as possible, but many times the federal regulations are not as prescriptive as we would like. They're not as clear as we would like. So I'm not opposed to leaning on them as much, but if they went that Shea route, maybe we do need to at least propose and give the option of should there be more prescriptive or restrictive state rules and regulations.
Right, because we can be more strict.
Yeah, we can't be looser than federal regulation, but we can definitely be more restrictive.
Exactly. And the most strict, which I think everybody is, at least most people here are pushing it, is the most strict is what they've done in 948, which is just say no to everything. Then you don't have to worry about DSHEA, the FDA route, or any of that. So, because that is effectively a blacklist that says nothing gets through. So I just from a personal standpoint, I fully understand all 7 of you advocating hard for just keeping 948 as written and saying that we don't need any of this. I get that position. My guess is a lot of the lawmakers feel the same way, but I don't know, and it's not my choice.
Yeah, Eric, and I want to be clear, what I've said earlier is that, if we're going to make recommendations on potential guidelines for safe methods of manufacturing, extracting, and synthesizing cannabinoids, including the sale of synthetic marijuana products, which is verbatim House Bill 948,
Yep.
It would have to be that the state creates rules that essentially are, FDA rules by reference. Because, going through the exercise of, doing all that would effectively, if we did it well, we would end up where the FDA is, because they have good rules. FDA rules are considered like, amongst the best, if not the best in the world. So why wouldn't we end up there? So why not just, if we're going to make that recommendation, my point earlier was like, just say, hey, make your guidelines, make your rules for manufacturing and selling these things based on FDA, CFR 111, 211 as they're applicable, for intended use.
Do they need to then apply to the FDA and go through that process and get certification? That would be my question.
Yeah, no, that would be the intent. It would have to be state specific, because if the legislature is dealing with it, they could definitely say, of course, well, these have to go through the FDA approval process, but they could also say, create a whole state organization and set of entities, or, farm it out to all the various agencies to make sure this is met. And this would be a set of new rules, new statute that, or maybe, existing statute reference to that, basically mimic and reference FDA rules. That makes sense?
Yeah, it would have the same stuff like purity and residue, and it would have to have the same controls.
Yeah.
And I know this, we get hung up on this a lot, because the Bill or House Bill says recommendations on guidelines for safe methods of manufacturing. I guess I'd just like to reiterate the point that the FDA doesn't do this either, so the state wouldn't. The FDA does not go out and tell, Pfizer that this is the way you should make this drug. What they do is they say, you need to jump through these 19 hoops and prove that the way you chose to make it fits in this acceptable condition of purity and all of that, and the GMP. So I think we've talked a few times now about the state doesn't have the authority or the knowledge to tell people how to safely manufacture this. Neither does the FDA. That's the short version. They come in after the end, at the end of the evaluation, after the company has already shown that they can meet all the rules, and then they review the process and decide whether they think it's okay. So the FDA doesn't prescribe it. So Montana can't either, I guess, is the short version. The state can't do what the FDA can't do.
The FDA offers all sorts of guidelines that get very granular about how to do things. Absolutely. But
Yeah.
from I think what you're trying to say is like from a rule standpoint, like the rules, everybody's trying to interpret what an FDA rule is. Well, what do they mean by, identity and scientifically valid? What does that mean? So, that's what the FDA does by rule and enforceable. And they do provide guidelines that then, that's a whole other thing, but they have a huge, it's a huge organization.
Mhm.
So like for the state, the rules would be, you have to basically follow the rules set out in CFR 111, 211, or just, replicate whatever those rules are in Montana code explicitly. If we were going to make a recommendation, I mean, I don't know that I could support anything else. And then, generally speaking, though, that's a huge lift for the state to take on.
Yes. I know it's what I do for a living. It's hard and complicated. I think someone at one of our earlier meetings expressed that they're not sure the lawmakers were knowing what they were asking for. That may be the case. I don't know.
Any other comments out there? I'm kind of feeling like the general consensus is a FDA-based something. But I also do see where you're coming from as well.
Just if you do, I guess from my perspective, I just ask that you maybe modify this a little bit to make sure you address that loophole of where someone within the state could bypass the dietary supplement and would also take out that 30-day.
Yeah.
If that makes sense, because I mean.
Well, so you're
if you
obviously way
advocate-
more familiar with that process than I am. I have like the
No, that's-
40,000 foot
Well, sure.
understanding. And so all these documents are open for edits.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't advocate this approach per se, but if you're gonna take it, I think it would be smart to close off the two things that, if I were Sinister, the two things I would exploit.
Yeah.
Which is not doing interstate commerce to try to cut FDA out of the loop, and then not doing the FDA's allowance of 30 days. I would just say, if you want to do the FDA route, you do
Those are
not,
not
yeah,
allowed.
you do not get to go that way. And if you only sell in Montana, you still have to go that route.
Okay.
So, because I think all of you have expressed, and some of you have seen, we saw it in your January thing, how easy it is for companies to find ways to live in a space that nobody intended for them to. And
Yeah.
those are two pretty big ones for me that someone could try to occupy.
Yeah.
And still meet what you guys wrote, thinking that this basically shuts it down and shows it to, or shoves it all to FDA.
Yeah, that's good insight that, yeah, even though, these things do exist, there's, like you
There's
identified, there's still ways.
yeah. I think guys has experienced some of those as well, it sounds like.
Yeah, so I think that's a wonderful addition to that draft. Like I said, I'm feeling like general consensus is, an FDA something. I definitely do understand your point of view. And I do think that, that it's important for if possible.
Consensus, or are you talking unanimous?
Um,
Because I think 7-1's a pretty strong consensus about anything. Know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, I'm not sure there's any other topic that the 8 of us would all agree on everything. So,
Okay.
so I don't take any offense at 7-1. I still think that's pretty strong.
Great. Okay. Well, then moving forward.
Not to cut you off. I'm
No.
just saying, I hope you don't think that I'm trying to scuttle seven people's opinion.
No, I think you have valid points. But yeah, I do believe that the advisory council has consensus on this, but I do also, appreciate and respect your opinion as well. And so, maybe the path forward would be, the consensus here is an FDA path. However, there is this other way that's kind of like a FDA based state approach. Would that be a fair assumption for what you're trying to cook up?
Yeah, I don't know about that. I think what I would have proposed, or what I was working on, was proposing the elements that Montana is going to have to address and set rules for, just like you guys did for marijuana. I mean, you said it. You said, talking about, maybe we shouldn't talk about dosing, but you guys set a dose because you have to.
Yeah.
And the state of Montana is going to have to set a dose. You're not going to be able to allow the manufacturers to set their own dose. So there's going to have to be a table of every cannabinoid that they think we can allow in, and the maximum amount that it's allowed to be. And then we're going to have to put in what Montana lawmakers decide are purity requirements. I mean, is it 99.5? Is it 99.9? Is it the top 10 byproducts that they have to list? All of that, they have to decide whether or not these products can be sold until Montana says they don't meet, or the converse, which is what I wrote down as my preferred approach, was they have to apply to the state and get approval before they can ever put the product on the market. That way you don't have to try to take something off that you don't like anyway.
Yeah.
So the lawmakers need to understand that if they want to pursue this, they need to have purity requirements, they need to have residual chemicals from the reagent requirements, they need to have byproduct requirements, and they need to have dosing requirements, and they have to have a list of what the acceptable compounds are. All of that has to be set forth.
Yeah.
And that's what I would be telling them is, and then, I mean, John and others are right. Referring them to CGMP is a great way for a company to understand how to make a product that can be evaluated by a regulator and either accepted or denied. But it doesn't mean you have to go through FDA to do it, I guess.
Yeah.
CGMP are guidelines for everybody to use. I mean, it doesn't just apply to things that are ultimately going to the pharmaceutical market.
So since we're getting close on time here, I think perhaps our best way forward on this is to put forth the general consensus here, which is the FDA-based route, and then we can also have a section that says, if you wanted to try and do this outside of those parameters, these are the top, action items that you'd really have to pay attention to. And then you go into your, like all the things you're just talking about, your dosing, your purity, your residuals. Maybe that would be a good place to talk about age gating, and all the things to sort of bring it in. But keeping it high level, like I will just tell you right now that if you put 10 pages of that in a document, they're not going to probably end up reading it. So a super concise, condensed, to the point bullets of all of those things that says, hey, legislature, if this is something that you intended, these are the big action items that will have to rein in if you don't choose FDA. Does that make sense?
It does. It's just not, to me, it's not complete enough for what they're asking for. They're not asking for what, to me, they're not asking what should be considered. They're asking for what are the guidelines. And I think I would want to propose more of the guidelines, not just of like, these are the things you need to consider if you want to continue to pursue guidelines. It's kind of that's a partial answer.
Well, are there what other bullets would you include then?
I quit at 10 really quickly. Age gating was one. Excuse me. I didn't even get into the manufacturing side because I think that's in some ways the easiest. I mean, it doesn't seem like it's
GMP thing, right?
No, it's not GMP because GMP doesn't guarantee you have a safe, clean product. The specifications and the final product specs are what guarantee you have a safe, clean product. GMP means that you have set the quality assurance programs in place so that you're able to replicate your system and end up with what you are putting out. You can, I think you alluded to it in your FDA route for methamphetamine. You can do CGMP on methamphetamine and end up with a chemical in the end that met exactly what they said they did. But you don't have to go that route to make a chemical. CGMP is more of a quality assurance system that documents everything you do. You have to do batch testing. You have to do all your records. You have to do your supplier stuff. You have to do your certificates of analysis. That's what GMP is. It's not it doesn't mean that what comes out is good and ready to go.
So
it's really the nuts and bolts of how to run a manufacturing operation.
Would you like to draft I don't know, 1, 2, 3 page something for the council to review that goes over these the things that you're finding important and that you would like to discuss?
I guess I didn't think we were going that route from the last meeting, and I think it would be hard to do it this late. I mean, we literally have 3 meetings left, if we even have meetings.
Well, that's something else we need to discuss because
the
report needs to be written.
I think we're done. I mean, starting from what was discussed at the last meeting, I think we're done. I think it's just 7-1. People are going to say the FDA route is the only viable mechanism, possibly bolstering what FDA means to get rid of a couple of loopholes.
Yeah.
And then as my dissent, which is, if that's not the only route, here's another route you could take, and then I'll just lay that out.
Okay.
As I see fit, if you will. I mean, I'm not going to create an entire program for them to decide to say yes or no on, but I can point to what the required elements are.
Yeah, I think that sounds like a great.
Yeah, and they'll see clearly in the report, 7-1 say either keep 948 as written or make the companies go through FDA. I mean, they know that's what the council as a whole is saying.
Right.
And then they can read the rest and be like, I don't know why we'd want to go that way.
That sounds like a good path forward to me. Does anyone else object to that course of action?
I think it's a good play.
Okay, well.
Here, this isn't ready for public consumption, but some of the other items I was talking about, because you asked about others and I couldn't think of them.
Yeah.
The natural cannabinoids, I think I told John, maximum concentration is going to basically do the relative to Delta 9. I was going to propose that only edible products are allowed because we don't want them applying it to, I know that's common to like apply the liquids to hemp, which allows them to be smoked. To me, combustion creates more of a problem than synthesis does for creating chemicals that we don't know anything about. I was going to propose that if synthetics are ever allowed, they're not allowed to be put into food products because of this reason that Ian seemed to have stumbled across. One, you have the problem with kids like food. 2 is you have the problem if it's not being dosed right anyway. Oh, sorry, what's that back there?
So as a quick heads up, I just got a message from Representative Steve Galloway, who was in attendance, and he would like to say a few words. So
Perfect.
Representative Galloway.
Thank you for letting me in. I was a little late getting to the dance today because I was tied up, but I just wanted to make sure the panel knew that this bill draft was done in less than 5 days. And this part of it is something that I completely missed. And it was never our intention to develop a pathway for synthetics. I misread what the intent was for the committee. I wanted was to be able to continue to oversight any new, as I was explained by the chemists and so forth with the ag department, and that, people keep coming out with new formulas and new things on such a ongoing basis that we should be able to review those and be able to stay on top of it. I didn't quite read this language that we were going to go down this path. So I don't know if that insight helps you any, but was never our intention to develop a pathway for synthetics. I believe our seed to sale is enough of a burden for the state to administrate. And definitely was not the intention of this legislation.
Thank you for that comment, Representative Galloway.
And thank you for letting me participate.
Do you recommend that we don't pursue it then? Or is that?
I don't think there would be
Simplifying it?
any support in the legislature to develop that process at this time. I really don't. I think our plate's pretty full just controlling the, the intention of this legislation was to stop people that are trying to skirt the rules that we put in for legalized marijuana with the synthetic products, because, the city manager from Great Falls is who contacted me with the threats of the people who have licensed and been, doing everything legal being, competed with by people that were doing, the illegal things, but we didn't have any statutes to stop them. And that was the whole idea of creating this. Like I say, I misread this as being an oversight committee to make sure that if new, the part that I don't understand, the new chemical processes or new formulas or, was going to be the oversight of the committee. But, I guess the wording is more of such to direct us towards looking at a synthetic pathway. But, being the wording's there, I guess you have to address it properly. But I would suggest that we just, I think what you're saying, the FDA, that we don't open a gate or look to open a gate for a pathway for that development, because this is part of the problem that it's being created by the synthetics, is creating a market that isn't regulated and had no oversight. And that was the whole purpose of this. So if we ever did do that, I do think it would take a lot deeper dive than what we're able to do at this time.
Thank you for your comments, Representative Galloway. We appreciate it. Okay, so I think what we were discussing is still valid. We'll move forward with the FDA route.
Is it, or since he's the sponsor of the bill, would that not mean that we do not have to continue working on this and pursuing it? Because my whole drive for this, as you know, was the House bill said to, not because I want to. If the sponsor is saying that was not the intent and this is not what we want, would it be appropriate to just say, okay, and we won't pursue it? We just provide the definitions. That would be clean.
Yeah, I think since he carried the bill, that what he says has a lot of weight to it.
I agree. I just don't know if that's, if he says that's fine and we can stop, then that's probably.
I believe, if I might interject right here, I think
Yeah.
that was the whole intention is for you guys to be able to oversight any new developments or any formulas that we should be paying attention to, that we need to set further guidelines on. Because
even new ones coming up even new ones coming up should be banned though, right? We wouldn't. Yeah. So.
But what we may need to be doing is developing new lists of stuff that we need to, again, address in the next legislature. Because, from what the guys at the ag department, chemist, I can't remember his name, but, they start talking about these different percentages and formulas or how they're making something. Like he says, we tried to cover all of those as we could, and there's a huge list, but he said that, there's constantly something new, somebody's finding or developing. And those are the things that we really need the oversight, is to be able to continue, making sure that we protect the seed to sale process was in my intention, not necessarily to help develop a whole new strain of business that we have to have a whole nother regulatory agency involved in. I don't know if that insight helps, but I definitely think if there's, things that you can list that aid in that. But my intention never was to develop a pathway for synthetics.
Yeah, so for purposes of this report, I think all these conversations are leading to our recommendation for any potential guidelines would be FDA based. I think that's just kind of the natural conclusion of this. And so thank you again, Representative Galloway. That was very insightful and for clearing some of that up for us. Given that we only have 5 minutes left here, I did want to discuss this report and the timeline that's actually coming up quite fast. And so my plan was to go through and review all of our previous recordings of meetings and review for content, and then put forth a first draft of this report. And there will be no surprises in it. Everything that we've discussed will make it in some way or another into this report. At that point, I will distribute it out to members of the council, and you can provide feedback as you see necessary, and we can just go back and forth virtually on that document. Is there any objections to that?
Nope.
Okay, so hearing no objections, that's how we'll move forward. So keep an eye out in your emails. I will put a first draft of this together, and would really appreciate all of your thoughts on that when it comes out. And again, as a reminder, that report is due September 15th. However, I think the earlier we can get it out, the better, just because there are some things that are kind of out of our control happening at the committee that's in charge of this. So, but with that, if there aren't any other comments, I think we'll conclude the meeting. It's 3 minutes early. But I just want to first sign off and say thank you guys all so much for participating. We had some really good conversations, really great discussion, and I think that the report will really reflect that as well. Have a great 3-day weekend, guys.
All right. Thank you. You too.
Thanks, everyone. You too.
Thank you.